expected, at least not very often. And so that's the joke I use every week. And so just get used to it. I have a bunch of corny jokes and I'm going to use them, okay? I got a huge repertoire and you guys aren't laughing at all. So thanks, James. I appreciate you too. Just joking. Kind of. I do appreciate it. Anyway, so back to what we're talking about today. Today we're talking about marriage. This is our last week in our Till Death Do Us Part series, and we've been talking about, the first week we talked about the purpose of marriage and the design of marriage, and last week we talked about the posture of marriage, and both of those have been pretty heavy on the theological side of things, and today I want to get a little bit more practical. Today we're talking about the priority of marriage, particularly priorities in a godly marriage. What does it mean to have priorities? What are the priorities we should have in a godly marriage as we're seeking to love our spouses and live in godly marriages together? So that's the question we're asking today. What are those priorities? And when we talk about this question, we've really been talking about, from the very beginning, we've talked about marriage and what God's purpose is for marriage. And we've been trying to figure out, in some ways, how we are to live in this married relationship. And we've defined the purpose. And so today, I want to ask a question that I read in a book a few years ago. And the question is this: have you ever thought about the last day of your marriage? Have you ever thought about the last day of your marriage? Ecclesiastes 7:8 says, "The end of a thing is better than its beginning." The question comes from a book called Real Marriage by Mark and Grace Driscoll, and he goes on to say this. He says, "Too many couples put their best energies into the first day of their marriage. The cake, the flowers, clothing, photos have to be perfect. But while a wonderful first day of marriage is important, it's the last day that really counts." Will the last day of your marriage be prematurely, will the last day of your marriage come prematurely through divorce? Will the last day of your marriage be filled with regrets as you stand over the coffin of your spouse? Or by God's grace, will the last day be a day to rejoice in a life lived together, and a day to remember the gift your spouse was to you while you were on earth? A strong and lasting marriage doesn't happen because we chose the right person. A strong and lasting marriage it is something like rolling a set of dice, right? Like we roll this dice, and if everything kind of comes into alignment, then we'll have a good, long lasting marriage. That's not how marriage works. And marriage, when we think about marriage, oftentimes we're in very much an instant gratification sort of society. We think about the day that we're in right now, right? And where's our marriage right now? But have you ever thought about what that last day of your marriage will be like? Have you thought about the fact that your marriage, if you're married to someone for 20, 30, 40 years, what's the last day going to be like? And some of us, we just think about getting through this particular day. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that we just haven't thought about building our marriage. See, marriage, it doesn't happen by chance. It's not something about getting the right person. It happens when we understand the purpose of marriage, when we're committed to God's purpose and design for marriage. It happens when we understand the proper posture in marriage and God's design and role relationship of our marriage. And it happens when we properly order our priorities in marriage. Jesus uses the analogy in Luke chapter 14, verse 28, in regards to what it means to be a disciple of Christ. He says, "For which of you, desiring to build a tower, does not first sit down and count the cost, whether he has enough to complete it?" Jesus is referring to the life of a disciple. Like, if you're going to follow Jesus, like, you need to count the cost. You need to make sure you understand what it means to follow Jesus. But I think the analogy is a good one when we're considering marriage as well. See, if you're going to go and build a house or remodel a house, what's the first thing you're going to do? More than likely, you're going to come up, if you're not, crazy, you're going to come up with a plan, right? I mean, you're going to have a plan in place. And that plan is going to include where the foundation is going to go, right? And where we're going to build this thing, right? And then it's going to have, how deep we need to build the foundation. It's going to talk about, we're going to plan out in our heads where the walls are going to go and where the bathroom's going to go and with the pitch of the roof and where we're going to put the kitchen countertops and all that kind of stuff is going to be planned out. And more than likely, you're going to have an image in your head of what you want that house to look like, an image of what it looks like when it's finished, right? What color of the countertops are, and brick or vinyl siding or whatever there might be that's needed, right? And from there, you're going to work backwards. In some ways, we're going to work backwards to make sure that we know the steps that it's going to take for us to get to that finished product, right? Otherwise, if that's not what you were going to do, if you really were just kind of going to be a little foolish, and that's what Jesus is saying, it'd be kind of foolish to do this, but if you went out into a field and just started building something, right? You dug a hole, and you're not really sure where to start, but you just start digging a hole. And you're not really sure how big it's going to be, but you're just going to dig it out, right? And then you start laying down footers, and then you start building a floor, and then you're like, well, I don't know, maybe we should put a wall here. And then eventually they're like, well, maybe we should have a toilet somewhere. That'd probably be good, right? Like, you're hearing me say this and you're thinking, well, that's just crazy. Like, nobody's going to build a house like that. But that's exactly how we build our marriages at times. What we often do when it comes to marriages is most people go into marriage like you're building a home without a plan. You just start building walls and laying bricks and nailing down shingles without ever thinking, what do we want this thing to look like? What do we want this thing to look like? And so what happens is we develop bad habits. We start to have expectations, and those expectations aren't met. And so when those expectations aren't met, there comes with disappointments. We start having issues that come up in our marriage because we never really thought about the things that might pop up, right? And your marriage is overrun with distractions. Marriages are overrun with distractions. There's all kinds of reasons that marriage becomes unhealthy, but often it's because things get in the way of us pursuing our relationship with one another. Because marriages are full of distractions. Marriages are overrun with distractions. Just think about it. So if you start a marriage and you haven't kind of thought and planned and prepared, what happens when kids enter the picture? Now, that's probably one of the biggest adjustments you'll ever make in your life. If you haven't ever made that adjustment, it is a huge adjustment, right? I mean, parents in the room, you can amen this, right? It's a huge adjustment because you go from like, I get to decide when I go to bed, and I get to decide when I wake up, and I get to decide when I go to the store, and you get to basically make those decisions. But then when a baby comes into the picture, it's not always like that anymore, right? Don't be offended, but when I go to Walmart at 10 o'clock at night and I see families in there with their kids, I'm thinking, that stresses me out because I know what they're going to be like in the morning. My kids got to be down by 7:30, 8 o'clock, because if they're not, I don't want to be there in the morning, right? So we don't get to choose those things anymore. Like our lives become. Our thought process goes towards taking care of the kids. Our thought process goes towards making sure we're making money at work, or their jobs become stressful. And because of those things, those are distractions in our marriage. Now, anytime you start talking about kids as a distraction, people start, kind of getting their feelings hurt. I don't mean that. I think kids are a blessing from the Lord. But nonetheless, they are a distraction when we consider our marriages. Jobs are a distraction. Finances are a distraction. Hobbies and entertainment is a distraction. Extended family, your moms and your dads and your brothers and your sisters and your cousins and all those people are distractions in your marriage. Your friends are a distraction in your marriage. How do we deal with the distractions of our marriage? When we don't have a plan, when we don't have our things in order, a lot of the times we just react. It's similar to if you were going out to build a house and you walked out into the field and you start building your house and something pops up. And you realize, you know what? It'd be good if we had that too. Let's put that on the house too. And well, let's do that. This is a need we have. If you go into a lot of old churches that have grown over the years, you'll see this. I worked at the YMCA in Fargo, and that's exactly what happened. They built a building at one point at the YMCA, and they said, this will be sufficient for what we need, right? And then the community around it grew, and the needs of the YMCA grew, and so they started smacking buildings on next to the YMCA, right? You can see it on our campus, right? I mean, we've got this building, we got that building, we got this building, we got all kinds of buildings, right? But at the YMCA, they would have this, so you would walk in on the first floor, and then you'd walk down to the basement. And then in order to get to the other section, you'd walk through this hallway, and then you would go back upstairs. So you went downstairs, and now you're going back upstairs. And you were thinking, what in the world? Why would they design it like this? And the reality is they didn't design it like this. The needs changed, so they added on to it, right? And then it became this confused mess in some ways. You can't control that within a building, an organization, but you can control that within your marriage as we properly plan and prepare and prioritize within our marriage. But most of the time we just deal with distractions by putting another piece into the puzzle. Children make life busy, and time's taken up raising them. Jobs get challenging, and money gets tight, and stress begins to build. And as more things come into life, it seems almost to feel like life becomes out of control. So if we're going to keep distractions and changes in our life from destroying our marriages, we have to get our priorities in order. We have to get our priorities straight. See, I believe God has designed and created a hierarchy of priorities for married couples. And I think this hierarchy of priorities that I'm going to share is not just for married couples. I think it's for all of us. There are certain categories. If you don't have kids, there are certain categories that you can kind of strike off. That's not for me yet. Or they kind of change and the nuances change, but nonetheless, I believe these priorities are the way God has designed things to function. Our priorities, if to define that word, really is what we pay most attention to. Our priorities is what we have deemed most important in our lives. And you can tell what people have deemed most important in their lives of how they spend their money, how they spend their time, what they get stressed out, what they lose sleep over, what they talk about the most. That's what the priorities are in people's lives. If I was to spend a day watching a hidden camera view of your life, I could probably figure out pretty quickly what the priorities are. I don't have that on anybody, okay? Trust me, I don't. We don't have like drones that are following around our church members. And Andy and I are sitting in our office watching the drones all day. Aha! Gotcha. That's not what we do. But nonetheless, it'd be kind of cool sometimes to do that, but because then we would figure it out. But nonetheless, that's not what we do. But if I did, you would probably figure out pretty quickly. If you did that to me, you'd probably figure out pretty quickly what my priorities are, and my priorities aren't always in order either. That's the reality. Is I'm preaching this message, and this is true of anybody that's in this stage. Like, if I'm preaching the message, it doesn't mean that I'm automatically the one that's got it all figured out. I mean, when it's the marriage series, I oftentimes have to come home and say, hey, you know what I said? I probably need to do that better too. So, Pam, bear with me as I try to fix my life in line with the thing I just preached and told everybody they need to do, okay? So know that I'm not always the best at that. But if we look, what is most important in your life? When our priorities are out of order, oftentimes we feel that alignment. We feel that issue with our alignment. A few years ago, I was sharing with a pastor some decisions I was trying to make and praying through some issues that I was dealing with. And I shared with this pastor this, and he shared this thing with me he called it the 6 P's of priorities. And I thought this was really a neat way for us to kind of understand the priorities God has for our lives. And so I want to share that with you today. And so I'm going to tell you guys in advance, I like the way words kind of work together. And so oftentimes I'll try to I always get the word mixed up. Anyway, use the same letter to start off. What is that? Somebody help me out. The same letter, like you have P's or you have C's. What is that? Alliteration? Is that right? No, not alliteration. What is it? Anyway, you guys get what I'm saying. But anyway, there's 6 P's, but sometimes you have to stretch the words. And so that's what we're going to do today. We're going to stretch the words to make them fit, okay? So bear with me as we go through. But the 6 P's of priorities. And when these P's are out of alignment, when we're not in alignment with these P's, when these reality or these priorities aren't the way they're supposed to be, I believe we're going to sense a sense of being out of alignment in our lives. The first P that we're going to talk about is the person of God. The number one relationship in our lives and in our marriages and in everything in our lives, the number one relationship is our relationship with God. It was the first relationship that ever existed in creation, right? So God created the heavens and the earth. He created the world that we live in, and He created man and breathed life into man. And that was the first relationship that ever existed, God and man. We were designed to worship God. We were designed to center our lives and our existence on God. And Jesus says in Matthew chapter 6, verse 33, "But seek first the kingdom of God and His righteousness, and all things will be added to you." That is going back to created order. What's the first thing and the most important priority in your life? Your relationship with God. That's what Jesus said, and that's how it has been since the very beginning, right? God's greatest commandment is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, and all your strength. It comes before any relationship that you have. It becomes before anything that you pursue, including your spouse and your children and your extended family, your friends, your hobbies, your workplace, all of those things. The most important thing in our lives is our relationship with the Lord. See, the reality is, though, if we look at our lives, that is not often how we live our lives. We have developed a really good way of compartmentalizing our lives. What I mean by that is that we put our lives into different compartments. And God's compartment is what we do with our time on Sunday morning. And maybe a couple other nights of the week, or maybe a couple other days of the week. And we put these things into compartments. We say, this is my time with the Lord, and this is my time with my family, and this is my time with my friends, and this is my time with my hobbies. And what this is saying, what I'm saying when God becomes a priority, is that our relationship with the Lord educates, sustains, directs, is the umbrella over which everything else in our lives is lived. He's the most important person in our lives. He's the most attention in our lives is going towards the Lord. If you're married, your relationship with your spouse is dependent upon your relationship with the Lord. If you're a parent, your relationship with your kids and your pursuit of parenting and growing and nurturing your children is in response to your relationship with the Lord and is dependent upon your relationship with the Lord. If you're working a job, it should be worked as if unto the Lord. If you're playing a game or doing something in entertainment or trying to be entertained, you're doing it as if unto the Lord. What would God want me to do, and how would God want me to spend my time? Like, our attention, our direction in life should be focused on the Lord. Jesus says, or Paul says, when he's referring to the marital relationship even, he says it's like Christ and the church. He says the relationship between a husband and wife should direct us to our relationship with God, to the relationship that Jesus has with the church, the gospel relationship. That's the focus and direction. But the reality is, we start to put other things in that place of priority in our lives, and ultimately what we're doing is we're making a God out of the things that God created. It's the heart of idolatry. When anything else in our lives is a bigger priority to us than God, we have created an idol. When our spouses become God in our lives, we are worried about taking care of them and making sure they're happy, or what they think of us, or the strength of our marriage, or our intimacy, or whatever it might be. And that's our focus, and that's our attention. And so when those things fail, I fail, and I'm a failure, and I'm defined by it. And that ultimately means that your spouse has become your God. When your children become your God, your identity is found in how successful, how safe, how loved loved you are by your children, and so they become your God. How good you are as a mom, how good you are as a dad, or whatever it might be. And so we feel defeated, or we feel like a failure when things don't go well, because they've become our God, and they have usurped the priority that God should have in our lives, because our value is found in how well we're doing at that particular area of our life. When jobs become our priority, they become our God. And the reality is, all those things are really bad gods. Don't make your spouse a god, because they can't handle that weight. Don't make your children gods, because they cannot handle that responsibility. Don't make your job a god, because it will fail you. God is our number one priority. The pursuit of a relationship with Christ is our number one priority. And it's not just about checking a list of things that you do and saying, I had a quiet time this morning and I prayed and I went to church and God must have been my priority. No, it's saying everything in my life should be in order to worship and bring Him glory. God is our number one priority. And our number two priority, if you're married today, if you're not married today, this still applies for you, but your partner is your number two priority. The first relationship that we were given in creation was our relationship with God. Our second relationship was the relationship between a husband and a wife. If you're not married today, then this is an area of preparation for you. Even if you're a teenager today, this is an area of preparation. Your most important priority is not the girlfriend that you're pursuing right now, or even the second most important priority. It is your spouse and preparing for that spouse in the future. If you're in middle school or high school, it's probably not the person you're dating, to be honest with you. It might be. But it's more important for you to get your heart right and get your thought process right in order for you to know what it looks like to be a husband or a wife, so you can prepare yourself for that relationship. For those that are married in the room, know that your spouse, whoever that might be, is your second most important priority. Genesis chapter 2 verse 24 says that man will leave his father and his mother and become one flesh with his wife. That one flesh union is the closest relationship human beings can have. Genesis chapter 5 paints the picture of a husband and a wife's priorities. We talked about this last week, right? Your posture speaks to your priorities. A husband's posture towards his wife is lovingly leading and serving his wife. So the priority of a husband is to love and lead his wife. In the same way, wives are their posture towards their husband is following and submitting to her husband and helping him in his leadership. So her priorities are towards her husband in loving and following and helping him in his leadership of the home. That's the way God has designed it. And so your priorities are built into that relationship. See, embracing your spouse as the most important human relationship in your life forces you to make choices that put him or her before other things in your life, even good things. There's good things in your life that we have the opportunity to pursue. But reality is, if that's the second biggest priority in your life, there's some things that you can't pursue at certain seasons of your life, or maybe never, because that's the priority of your of your walk and of your life. There's certain jobs that you really shouldn't pursue because it's more important for you to be a husband to your wife. There's certain hobbies and activities that, you know what, there's nothing necessarily wrong with them, but it's more important for you to be home and to be with your wife and your children, because that's the number one priority. There's sacrifices that we make because the priorities that we have. I sacrifice certain things because my relationship with God is my number one priority. I sacrifice certain things because my relationship with my spouse is my number two priority. And see, this is not a bad news message in the sense that, oh, I've got bad news, you've got to give up all the fun things in life. No, I'm saying that if you want your marriage to be a satisfying relationship with another person, if you want your marriage to be strong and healthy and God-glorifying and personally satisfying, I believe your priorities have to be in line. Number 3, your third priority is being a parent. If you're not a parent today, then this particular one is more of a preparation mode as well. But being a parent is the third relationship in creation. God, his relationship with mankind, and then the relationship with the spouse, and then the relationship with children. This is often the one we get most out of alignment in our culture. And though this relationship is deeply significant, when our relationship with our children distracts us from loving our spouses, we have gotten our priorities out of order. Our children often become idols, and our marriages often are the sacrificial lamb. There's a statistic that marriages in those 65 and older the divorce rate has increased enormously. I shared that in our first sermon. And I think that's oftentimes because we've gotten away from, we basically spent all these years raising our children and investing our time and our effort and our money into our children, and then our children go off to college and get married, and then we look at each other and we thinking, I don't even know this person anymore. I don't know what to talk about with this person. I don't know what to do with this person. I mean, we haven't been intimate in however many years, and how do I even sleep in the same bed as this person? And your relationship with your wife or your husband just starts to seem like I don't really even know this person anymore, because your attention has not been on them. Your attention has been entirely on your kids for years and years and years. We spend thousands of dollars on sports and activities and rarely spend money going on a date with our spouse. We spend hours at ball games and dance recitals and slaving over homework, but rarely spend intentional, uninterrupted time with our spouses. We devote our entire homes to our kids, every room having toys and kids stuff, and even opening our bedrooms to our kids, and even opening our beds to our kids. I know I'm stepping on toes, but when the culture, we have a culture of co-sleeping. And I get that it works, that in some families it's a conviction, but I want to just share a passage of scripture with you from 1 Corinthians chapter 7. And I don't want to focus entirely on the intimacy factor, but that is a huge issue in marriages. Sexuality in marriage is essential in marriage. That we are one flesh union. It's a physical reality. That one flesh union is a coming together of two people in holy matrimony to enjoy the intimacy of one another. That is a part of it. And so Paul speaks to this. And in chapter 7 of 1 Corinthians, he has asked the question, is it good for man to have sexual relations with a woman? And Paul says, within a marriage, absolutely. It's not just something that you can do, it's something you should do. Paul says in verse 3, the husband should give to his wife her conjugal rights, and likewise the wife to her husband. For the wife does not have authority over her own body, but the husband does. Likewise, the husband does not have authority over his own body, but the wife does. So that's not saying that I get to walk in and say, okay, I have the authority over your body, and so we're going to do it right now. That's not what it's saying, okay? It means it's just the same kind of posture that you would have in a Christian family, like I talked about last week. My posture is sacrificial service to my wife, and so I sacrificially serve her by thinking about her and her needs more than I think about my needs. And same way on the wife's side. It's a giving and a taking. It's a loving, sacrificial service. And that's the posture of intimacy with a family. It's the posture of everything within a family. But then the verse that really stands out in this particular circumstance, it says, verse 5, do not deprive one another except perhaps by agreement for a limited time, that you may devote yourselves to prayer, but then come together again so that Satan may not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. What does Satan want to do? Satan wants to say, hey, your kids are really important to you. Your kids are a gift from God. Satan would say that, right? They are the most important thing in your life. You need to give your time to them. You need to give your full self to them. Your husband, he can take care of himself. Your wife, I mean, she's good. But your kids, that's the thing, right? And what's at stake is the thing we talked about in the first week. Jesus compares the relationship. He identifies the relationship between a husband and a wife as the example, as the world, the image that the world sees of the relationship between Jesus and his church. And the thing that Satan wants to do the most is destroy that relationship, and he's doing a really good job of it. 50% of marriages are ending in divorce. Is it possible? It's because we have focused our efforts on raising our children and giving them all that they could ever desire, and being there for them in every particular circumstance we could ever be there, and at the expense and at the sacrifice of laying out our marriage on the sacrificial altar of our children and worshiping our children at the expense of our marriage. I'm not telling you how to keep your bed. But I will say that God honors the marriage bed, and he wants us to pay attention to how we're in relationship to our spouses. Don't let your kids come between your intimacy and your marriage. Don't let your kids come between your pursuit of your spouse in friendship and love and intimacy. Don't get too busy with all the things that you're doing to not focus on your marriage, not focus on your marriage bed. Protect your bedroom. I'm like a Nazi. Well, I shouldn't say that. I'm like really serious. There we go. I'm like really serious about our bedroom. Like when the girls go and they start pulling out toys and they start playing in our bedroom, I'm like, hey guys, listen, you've got the art room. We've got an art room that's devoted to art. We've got their bedroom. We've got toys downstairs in our basement. The one room that Daddy wants is my bedroom. Don't put toys in my bed. I don't want to get in my bed and have, like the other night I got in my bed and shoved my hand under the pillow, and there's this rattle thing, that music maker thing, and I'm like, what is this doing in here? And I get mad. I'm like, what is this doing? And I'm like, okay, I just gotta okay, no more toys in Daddy's bedroom, okay? Because that's our one room. That's the place I can come and just be with my wife and not have the distraction of all the kids' toys and things. They get 75% of the house. Can I just have that room? And I love my kids, and I want to give my kids everything that I can desire, but the most important thing is to give them a loving example of Jesus Christ and his church, as I'm devoted to my wife and I'm sacrificially serving her and leading and loving her. They need that. So many kids are growing up with these dysfunctional families because we've gotten our priorities all mixed up. Your number 2 priority is your spouse. Your number 3 is your children. Number 4 is parishioner. That means that's what I'm this is an example. You couldn't say church member because I needed a P. Okay, so parishioner. This may seem out of order. You might be thinking it's more, church is more important than providing for my family. Where's work? Where's that at? In God's economy, the church family and the home are interconnected. Church is the family of God. In Matthew chapter 12, verses 49 and 50, Jesus says, and stretching out his hand towards his disciples, he said, here are my mother and my brothers, for whoever does the will of my Father in heaven is my brother and sister and mother. Jesus makes the church and his followers, he makes them as important, if not more important, than his own family. I don't necessarily believe that we need to expend our family at the expense of, or getting our families up at the expense of the church, but I believe that is an important relationship, a priority for us to be a part of the family of God. Not just attending on Sunday morning, but investing ourselves in the family of God. God wants us to invest not just our family, but into our family, but invest in the family. He wants us to invest our family into the family of God. That needs to be a priority in our lives. And number 5 is the provider. Your responsibility is to provide for your family. But it's not at the expense of your family. See, oftentimes we get priorities mixed up and we make a really good case. Well, I'm supposed to take care of my family, and so I'm going to work 75 hours a week to take care of my family and have 3 jobs on the side. But that's at the expense of the role that you play in your family's life, right? We often make an idol of our lifestyle. I want to live at this lifestyle. I want to have the access to this sort of things in my life, and I'll do it at the expense of being the father that I'm supposed to be, of being the mother I'm supposed to be, of raising my children the way I'm supposed to raise them, of being a spouse to my husband or my wife and taking care of them. When we do that, we think, well, I'm doing a good thing of providing for my family, but what you're doing is trying to succeed. You're trying to reach this level at the expense of your family. And it's really a pursuit of wealth. It's a pursuit of prestige. It's a pursuit of success. 1 Timothy chapter 6 verse 10 says, "For the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil." It is through this craving that some have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many pangs. We love money. And when we love money or position or success more than our spouse or our family, our priorities are out of order and destruction is sure to follow. Destruction is sure to follow. It's important to pursue, to provide, but it's not at the expense of your family. Lastly is this: playing, entertainment, hobbies. What are you willing to sacrifice, or what do you sacrifice for the pursuit of entertainment? I want you to notice 2 things. First, this: recreation and hobbies are the last on the list of 6 priorities. Your hobbies are not more important than your relationship with God, than your spouse, than your children, than your church family, and than your job. But I want you to know this too: recreation and hobbies are on the list. It's not that your hobbies, you can't have hobbies. It can't mean that you can't do fun things, but your hobbies cannot usurp the priorities of the other things in your life. You need time away. You need time to pursue things that are fun and enjoyable, but not at the expense of your family. See, we need to make a plan. This is the thing about when you have your priorities in order, you sit down at the dinner table and you say, okay, this is what I want to pursue hobbies, let's do it. And we make a plan. We communicate with our spouses. We make sure our priorities are in the right place. We listen to our spouses and we say, okay, when can I go hunting? When can I go fishing? When can I go shopping with my friends? When should we watch Netflix and chill? All those different things that we pursue as hobbies and as entertainment. And we say, okay, these are the priorities. We'll get these. These are the most important things, but those things will be there as well. But the reality is we make all kinds of sacrifices for entertainment and hobbies, right? So I want to ask you a question. Is your love for hunting or gaming or fishing or whatever it is worth losing your marriage over? Is your love for shopping and for sports and for things like that worth losing your marriage over? I'm not saying if you go hunting, I've been hard on the guys, okay? I know through this year I've been hard on the guys. I'm not saying going hunting equals you're going to lose your marriage. I'm not saying that. But I see so many families where guys will sacrifice time with their kids, time with their wives, to pursue something that they enjoy. And I think your priorities are mixed up. I think your priorities are out of alignment. And I believe that's a lot of the reason that your marriages are not where they need to be. Not the reason, but it's a part of the reason, for sure. So what do we do? Protecting our priorities. How do we protect our priorities? The first and most important thing is set your mind on things above. Colossians 3, chapter 3, verses 1 through 2 says this: "If then you have been raised with Christ, seek the things that are above, where Christ is, seated at the right hand of God. Set your minds on things that are above, not on things that are on the earth." Let your pursuit of God be the driving force behind your priorities. Let it be the energy behind your priorities. Let it be the focus of your priorities. I'm focused on things that are bigger than the things that I enjoy in this world. They're bigger than anything in this world. I'm pursuing the things that God finds most important. Set your mind on the things above, not on the things below. Secondly, cultivate your marriage. Be intentional about spending time with your spouse. Don't let the distractions of life get in the way of your pursuit of your spouse. Go on dates. Have sex. Laugh with one another. Cultivate your friendship. Fight fairly. Foster regular and deep conversations. Pay attention. Cultivate your relationship. Don't let your kids become the thing that ruins your marriage. They're a gift from the Lord. And in the proper place, your kids, one of the best gifts you can give your kids is a loving model of Christian marriage. Cultivate your marriage. And thirdly, develop a vision for your marriage. What do you want the last day of your marriage to look like? So when you're tired, and it would just be easier not to fight your kids back into their own beds, keep 1 Corinthians chapter 7 in mind. Because there's going to be one day where your kids aren't sleeping in your bed, and can you sleep in that bed with that man that's sitting next to you? If you're pursuing an intimate relationship with your husband and enjoying one another, is that what you want your, this kind of sounds weird, but do you want to be that old couple that everybody's like, oh gosh, I don't want to talk about that? If you know what I'm talking about. You guys can giggle. Just loosen up a little bit. We're talking about Jesus things. It's a godly thing. Is that what you want your marriage? We got to think about that. The decisions you make now affect the way your life is going to be lived later. When work begins to intrude on your time with your family and distract you from your spouse, remember your spouse needs more than just a paycheck. They need you. Develop a vision for your marriage. Write it down, memorize it, remind each other of it. Fight to keep your priorities in order so that God will be glorified and your marriage will be satisfying. Listen, I'm not saying this is a quick fix. I believe this is us being intentional about building our marriages, just like we would be intentional about building a home. Thinking through what's the most important thing, what's the guiding principles of our marriage, and us committing to those things. It's not too late. Maybe you're 5, 10, 16 years into this thing. It's not too late to say, listen, we need to get our priorities in line. During our response time today, my encouragement is, as we're singing, as we're praising the Lord, take these six priorities and engage yourself. Where are you at with these 6 priorities? Is something out of alignment? And spend this next few minutes talking to God and praying that the Spirit of God would move in your heart to move your priorities in line with where they need to be. Let me pray. Lord Jesus, God, thank you for your grace. God, thank you that we can come to you today and we can lift your name up in worship. God, we can hear your name as we speak it in prayer, but we can also read your words, God, that you wrote to us. And God, they're so powerful to change us. And do that in us today, Father. Your Spirit can work in us to change and mold and shape us into who you want us to be. So God, do that in us. God, I pray that our priorities become clear. And God, where our priorities are at now and where they need to be, God, and I pray that you and your Spirit and through your word would line them up. And God, as we sing, God, I pray that our hearts are drawn closer and closer to you. And God, as we leave this place today, God, I pray, God, that we leave with conviction in our hearts to change and repent and turn to you in whatever way that you would lead us to. God, thank you for your grace. And as we sing about following you, God, I pray that we would do that in our hearts. God, follow you. God, give our hearts fully and completely to you, Jesus. For it's in his name we pray. Amen. Let's stand.